So our next panel is going to present the first release of research building on CSB's Return on Sustainability Investment Framework in the food and agriculture sector, this time in collaboration with Deloitte. To moderate our panel, I'm so pleased to introduce Elyse Douglas, who is our Senior Research Scholar at CSB. Elyse has spent 30 years as a financial executive, including as Chief Financial Officer at Hertz and a member of the Board of Directors of Assurant. At CSB, where we are very lucky to have her, she creates monetization models for applying the ROSI methodologies across industries. So welcome, Elyse, and I'll let you introduce your panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abigail. Can everybody hear me? Okay. All right. As Abigail mentioned, we today, Deloitte and CSB, published a research paper on unleashing sustainable value in food and agriculture. And so our conversation today is going to be centered around that research. And just to give you a little bit of background, the research is grounded in work that we did a year ago that was HSBC funded, which was to build a ROSI framework for the food and ag industry. And that entailed focusing on 12 different strategies, which you can see up on this slide, ranging from mitigating climate change to employer and supplier well-being. And for each of the 12 strategies, we've identified practices and sub-practices. We identified the benefits that you would expect from those practices, and then we proposed a monetization method, how you would actually quantify that value. And that was really based on research and analysis that we've done with a number of food and ag companies over the last 7 years. So before we get into the discussion with our esteemed panelists here who we have with us from Constellation Brands and Yum Brands, and I have Max Krasilovsky from Deloitte, who was co-author of the paper. I want Max to take a minute to talk about why was Deloitte interested in this research? What were some of the findings, and what did you find most interesting?
Thank you, Elyse. Can everyone hear me? All right, great. So it's a pleasure to be able to come forward and actually share this research with everyone. If we think about the food and agriculture sector as a whole, taking up 30% of greenhouse gases in the world, using 70% of fresh water, there's a significant impact that we need to be able to address. It's also an area that is being most acutely impacted by climate change today. It happens every single day, and everyone throughout the value chain is feeling the struggles that are along with that. But it's also the one place that we really have a unique opportunity to drive significant impact today with the knowledge that we have, with the investments that we can make. There's no other place that I would look at that could actually say, I can achieve 50% emissions reductions by 2030. But we need to be able to do that faster. And so our role within Deloitte is helping to take organizations on that journey and support them in being able to make that change and make those investments. And when we were working with our clients, we looked out in the market, we saw that there was a really significant gap in understanding what was the quantifiable benefits from investing in sustainability. And that was a challenge that we came forward with the team from NYU to be able to help answer, and with the support of the panelists who are up here today, to be able to actually have some quantifiable data around what has been the return on this investment historically, and what is that perspective going forward.
Can you talk a little bit about the research approach?
Yeah, so to make sure that we were doing this in the most statistically significant way, we started with the NYU ROSI framework for food and agriculture as the basis for an executive survey that we launched out in the market to 350 global executives. And through that, being able to really understand what were the strategies that they went and implemented, and what was the impact that they saw historically, and what is their perceptions going forward. And by being able to do that, and do that deep understanding, it presented a real clear insights and pictures into what we have seen as the impact from that.
And can you talk a little bit about some of the key themes? Because that's going to be the center of our discussion.
For sure. And so the themes that you'll see up on the slide behind me really came out strongly through the data and the supplemental case studies and interviews that we did with organizations starting at the processor level all the way through to the end consumer. And these pieces that we see here, and it came forward strongly that there is that sort of undeniable positive business case that was seen by nearly all respondents to the survey. Everyone made more money, saved cost, mitigated risks, and saw other quantitative and qualitative benefits that came out of it. But there was a significant cost of inaction that we also saw, and that organizations had lost revenue or increased costs because of not taking action. I think other pieces as we go through it is that most people approach it from a risk mindset initially, but there were opportunities that came up throughout it that were unexpected. And that even though the benefit was universal, that there was the way that value was distributed across the entire supply chain differed, depending on where you sat and the activities that you did. And so I think that coupled with there's still a little bit of uncertainty of whether we're going to achieve this amount of value going forward because things are getting harder. And how do we do that and actually quantify all of those benefits is really tough. But there's knowledge that we need to actually collaborate more in order to get to these more complex topics, since we've addressed some of the low-hanging fruit initially.
Terrific, that's great. So I want to dig deeper into some of those themes with the panelists today. So we've got Alex and Brandy from Constellation Brands, and we've got John from Yum Brands. I'm going to ask you guys a question, but I'm going to ask you to also give a little bit about your role in the company so people understand your role. So my question is, based on what Max said, you know, the majority of companies are seeing benefit from their sustainability strategies. Can you give some examples of strategies that you've implemented that have created value either through revenues and or cost savings? So let's start with Constellation Brands.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brandy Muratone. I am the VP of ESG Finance for Constellation. For those of you guys don't know what Constellation is, we're a large beverage alcohol company specializing in brands like Corona on the beer side, Modelo, Robert Mondavi Winery, et cetera.
My favorite wine, The Prisoner.
Yes, The Prisoner. And High West Whiskey. Great old fashions and Manhattans for sure. You know, one of the strategies that we've put in place within our wine and spirit division that we're seeing benefits both in reduction and also helping out our top line was the irrigation sensors that we put in across our vineyards. So we've installed these precision irrigation with smart metering essentially that goes down about, not to get too technical here, but goes down in the earth and is able to determine like the water needed. So rather than like the old way of irrigating where you just turn on a spigot and the water just runs and runs and runs, we now have the ability to use the smart metering to turn it on and off exactly when the vine needs it. So that results in cost savings from water. It also results in cost savings from just energy using to have the water come in to irrigate the vineyards. But it also provides the perfect grape, essentially, by being able to regulate the water that goes into that. So you could also equate that to top-line benefit.
So more grapes, more wine, more revenues.
Yes, exactly. And more happy consumers.
And Alex, do you want to mention another one?
Yeah, my name is Alex Shneydman. I work in enterprise risk management. My involvement in sustainability is kind of twofold. On one hand, we're providing an expertise in risk monetization, quantification, and on another hand, we are partnering to make sure that our sustainability efforts don't create additional risk, but they actually lower the risk to a company, lower reputational risk, lower regulatory risk, and operational as well. So I think another initiative that Constellation had was around lightweighting glass bottles. Packaging, interestingly, is actually 50% of weight for wine, and a lot of it is within glass bottles. So optimizing design of a bottle and being able to lightweight saved a lot of money. And to highlight a couple numbers, lighter bottle for Miami Pinot Noir 750 milliliter is anticipated to reduce approximately 875 ton of glass per year.
Wow.
So it's equivalent to weight of approximately 1.2 million empty bottles.
Wow. I'm sure, too, in the transportation of those bottles, the less weight means less
emissions.
emissions.
Less
There's
emissions.
a lot of
yes.
follow-on.
Less fuel.
Yeah. All right. So John, how about at Yum Brands? Can you talk about some of the initiatives that have driven value?
Yeah, happy to. And just a little bit about Yum Brands, in case you don't know that word. It's more commonly known as Taco Bell, KFC, and Pizza Hut. And maybe just a little nugget about kind of Yum on the sustainability journey. I think one thing is, we open 13 restaurants a day. So that's restaurant every 2 hours. So thinking of resilience and sustainability and not expanding the world's footprint in food, which is something we absolutely must do, is critical and top of mind, like first and foremost on that. So we have kind of science-based targets, and a lot of those efforts, we've, over the years, really kind of had maybe too many goals, and we've really worked with a lot of consultants in the room to try to drive focus maybe a little bit, and really anchored our work around climate, packaging, and equality for 3 main areas where you can really lean in and accelerate change. And one of the first ones I would say is that's been a really pleasant surprise for us has been on packaging. I think once we set a goal a couple years ago, kind of aligned with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation of kind of principles around sustainable packaging. And we partnered up with another New York group, Closed Loop Partners, which was really an interesting kind of innovation challenge around particularly cups. Plastic-lined paper cups are like the holy grail of challenging to recycling. And what's been interesting, I think, for us from those 2 events is a couple things happened. One, we've had massive changes in transformations and moving away from plastics and packaging and nice reductions of thousands of tons on that system of scale.
Yeah.
But the other dynamic is it's changed the conversation with suppliers. It used to be when I would go back and talk to our packaging leads of like, we need to get to more recycled material or recycled content, X, Y, and Z. It was like, you'd hear back from the procurement team like, no, 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 no. When you set those big goals and join some of those higher profile conversations, all of a sudden they come back with, well, we're actually working on this, this, and this innovation that have lowered cost, added resilience, and kind of help lead towards those kind of journeys. So I would say some of it is we've seen those efficiencies, cost savings, volume reductions, but you had to put those big goals out there or you wouldn't have the right conversation.
Yeah. It's interesting because we did hear in interviews around working with suppliers that in a lot of instances they expected prices to go up. When they went to their suppliers for more sustainable packaging, they expected it to go up, and that was not what they found. They actually found prices coming down.
It always wants to start that way, but I think there's just a back and forth, and I think you develop a different relationship with suppliers too. Longer tenured contracts can build stability. They can make investments in driving carbon reductions, packaging reductions, when they know you're going to be with them over a longer time frame.
So that kind of reminds me of one of the other findings in the study, which was that many companies go into a sustainability strategy around risk mitigation, like Alex mentioned. And often then when they actually do the analysis and look at what the results are, they see benefits elsewhere. So there's one case in the paper that talks about companies' efforts around eliminating deforestation and exploitation of the supply chain. But in addition to risk mitigation, they also found operating efficiencies and sales benefits as well. So can you give an example in your organization where you expected some result and you saw some surprises? Who wants, anybody want to?
I'll build a little bit on the palm oil one because I was, on a personal level, I think I've been kind of curious about food for 30 years and kind of wandered through the world's food systems, kind of got acquainted with Tansi and Rainforest Alliance with the coconut project. That was my gateway drug into palm oil. So I think, palm oil is an interesting crop, I think, in this aspect because certainly all of the work in that space, especially with smallholders, when you do the certification, the training, the elements that come from it, I think we've seen pretty routinely, like in that supply chain, a doubling or tripling of smallholder incomes when they get certified, when they do things. There's agronomic kind of benefits, co-commitment with the environmental reductions that occur. And I think from a pricing standpoint, if you look at the certification, there is a little bit of cost, but I think it's like 35 cents a day or something like that. It's not a huge cost. But in terms of transformation of long-term value through that system, and there is brand enhancement and brand risk certainly goes along with that.
Yeah, and you guys have gone all RSPO?
Correct.
Yeah. Question for Max. One of the things we did discover was that in terms of value creation, where you sat in the value chain, you mentioned it a little bit, but it was particularly, we saw less value creation for a manufacturer than the opposite ends of the value chain. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. And this was definitely one of the more interesting pieces that came out, is how, although the business case is universally positive, it's not universally distributed.
Right.
And so we saw at either end of the supply chain, so upstream at the processor level and downstream at restaurant and retailers, actually higher revenue and greater cost reductions from investments in sustainability versus those that are manufacturers in the middle. And so if we think about like the current dynamics today, upstream at processor level, there's really a shortage of supply of more climate smart commodities that are being produced. That provides them greater negotiating power as they sort of have first access into that. And downstream, like those really controlling the consumer engagement, and who also have the flexibility to do a little bit more test and iteration of what actually drives consumer behavior and how they engage with those consumers. Also is seen to allow for greater return on investment versus manufacturers who, through the research, showed that strategies were a bit more proliferated, feeling like they're really getting pulled in both directions. And while the business case was still positive, it was not as strong for those in the middle as they were facing some of those pressures both up and down.
Right. So, Brandy and Alex, you guys are a manufacturer, in addition to being a producer. Are you seeing that? What are you seeing in terms of some of the pressures? Somebody mentioned earlier Walmart. You know, Walmart's the good news and the bad news.
Gosh, pressures, right, within the chain going downstream, right, as we work with our key retailers, right, they're asking questions now about our products and saying, hey, like, we would like you to have this certification, et cetera. So we're having to really be mindful about that and how we react. Anything else maybe from your side, Alex? But it's the retailers, it's also the regulations that we're also seeing pop up within countries, within individual states, that we're also having to adapt to as well, right? That's having a change on our products overall.
Yep. John, did you want to mention anything on that topic? Are you okay?
I think it is a challenge,
Yeah.
getting that capture of value and how you communicate it. It's not always easy. I think it's especially challenging for legacy brands, too. When you think of a 90-year-old KFC brand, their ability to lean in, you have to kind of ease yourself on that journey with market permissions a little bit.
Yeah.
It's been easier for Taco Bell, candidly, to kind of go in on a vegetarian front where that creates a new customer base and growth, and I think that's where they've seen it kind of the most. But it's an interesting calculus. We need Richard to come back and talk about the language we've used, because we've had a lot. We have a lot of consumer insights. Just being very analytical about the language you use to explain those benefits.
Yeah. So then the next question I have, which is a little bit of a challenge, which is this idea that there's underinvestment, or that sustainability strategies are undervalued. And we know that there's difficulties in measuring. So we'd love to hear from both Constellation and Yum what you see as some of the challenges in really measuring the benefits of your strategies, if you can give some examples.
I think that it kind of goes back to what I just mentioned, doing quantification and of benefits. I think there is a lack of data available, and because climate science in general just relatively new, when you develop any model, especially like financial model, you rely on historical data to set the trend and benchmark on the future numbers, and it's very hard to do. For one, it's not available, and there is no tools like, for instance, in finance industry like Bloomberg, where people can go and everything in one place, and you can play with numbers and you can see your peers and everything. Unfortunately, it's not available, and if you look at the idiosyncratic component of climate impact on an organization, is fairly small. Majorities, everyone is facing same challenges. So, and I think this is an area where people should collaborate and find leaders who can kind of lead along this journey of building out the tools, building out ability to quickly and easily add values to different climate initiatives and sustainability initiatives.
Yep. Anybody want to add?
I can give examples of kind of where it's been clean and easier and where it's like muddier and more difficult.
Be helpful.
So like for us, our legacy programs of sustainability were really all around reducing restaurant emissions. And that's the driver of all that for sure was operational efficiency and saving for our franchisees. Like we have a long kind of a legacy program, 10, 15 years of looking at taking lead standards and certification levels for building design and restaurant equipment, doing individual metering and testing to say, okay, use this fryer, not that fryer, and saving the franchisee operational money. That part's been easy, not easy, but easier, and a great value proposition behind it that I think our franchisees really appreciate. The challenging side is on the, call it the above ground carbon cycle. You know, we have a strategy around kind of do lots of aggressive pilots with our suppliers in beef, chicken, and dairy. We're seeing nice results from that. We also have a belief of systems transformation, so join the round tables, join those broader collaborations. You say you don't want to be a shiny penny in a bad bank. Let's have a better bank. Let's change the system where we can. And then data. I mean, we do try to lean in on that data piece because without that measurement, both of quantifiable results and economics, you can't communicate it that well. I mean, we need to use that data piece as a platform to make honest claims, tell insightful stories that consumers want to hear.
Yeah. Max, what are you seeing in terms of tools to help companies measure some of these environmental outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I just picking up on where Alex was saying and the difficulty of measuring things and looking at historic data in particular is that the future is going to be very, very different than the history that we've just had. And trying to understand how things are going to change and evolve is it's difficult to model in that way. And so I think this is, and where we're get back into some of the collaborations and that John was hitting on too, is there's leading science and academic institutions that are spending their day-to-day thinking about the ways in which we can measure and model out what are the pieces that we're actually trying to achieve to make the best decisions possible without perfect information. And then it really is, to John's point, of having to invest in those technology systems, invest in the data governance, invest in those processes to really make sure you have things buttoned up in a way that is extremely credible to outside parties, but also allows you to make better decisions internally.
Right. You know, we heard from Richard earlier that the populace is most concerned about climate change. So my question to you for starters is, what are you seeing in terms, this is for Constellation and Yum, what are the effects on your business of climate change today, and what do you expect it to, how do you expect it to impact in the future?
I'll take it.
I think we are already observing climate change. I think it's very obvious without even putting any statistic around it that we see more extreme weather. We see heat waves, droughts, wildfires in California, where a lot of our vineyards are. So that is just undeniable fact. So, right now we're in a process of really quantifying not just future impact of climate change, but what we actually already observing. So that might make easier case to get an attention within an organization. And then also, from a risk management perspective, we kind of treat this as any other risk. We're trying to put like business continuity plans, disaster recovery plans, and kind of think about adaptation to this new reality.
Do you mind if I add on that too? Because I mean, again, like what we're trying to do is we're trying to be able to quantify what our risks are today, but then also want to understand what those risks are in the future related to climate change. And, you know, we've partnered up with SWCA to help us run a climate
using the ROSI
scenario.
methodology.
Yeah, to really like to hone in and take a look at where these hot spots are that we could be encountering within our own four walls and also without our supply chain too. So it's critical to have that understanding and to be able to do that modeling of what does that look like potentially in 2030 or even in 2050, so many years out. But taking that information, and then where our challenge there is, it's how do you monetize, right? It's easy to see the risk, but then how do you flip that to a dollar sign?
So it's important to understand how it's impacted your business today. That in and of itself is probably a challenge in quantifying. And it's really the impact of all those events you said on the grapes and how it affects the yields on the grapes and what have you in the future.
Yeah, because there is no repository, as people are acclimating to climate change, like our operations departments are doing things, right, to mitigate these risks, but we're not saying, hey, you're doing this because of climate-based risk, and we're taking a log of everything that they're doing. So it's kind of going back and trying to understand, like, what actions have we already taken, and then to go back and a little bit back in history to quantify that.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting because it requires communication across different departments. It's not like you're going to be able to go to one area to say, what's been the impact. You got to connect all the dots along the way.
Yeah, I often say, Elyse says, I feel like I'm in the center of a tornado sometimes. And all of these risks are flying around, and we're just, trying to quantify them.
Well, we love having Brandy on the panel here because she's a finance person. We love finance people and sustainability. But let me get to John. Well, climate change, how's it affecting the restaurant business?
I think I wish I had a more positive answer of like we're doing it to lean in, and there's some elements of that, but I think it has amplified our risk like analysis and the way we look at things. We've tried to kind of leverage some of those requests that have been placed upon us, like a TCFD risk analysis, for example, that mapped out all of our kind of global supply chain origination points. And we've had some unfortunate opportunities, I guess I would call them, where we lost our chickens for a while in the UK. And that gave us like a rethink of how we...
How did that happen?
That was a distributor issue, not a climate issue. Distributor issue, not anyways. But I think that what it did, though, is it made us rethink our sourcing strategy.
Yeah.
That over-reliance upon like a single region, a single super supplier, is something we don't do anymore. So I think there's good and bad in that. We lose market influence because now we're buying from 35 chickens providers around, in any given market. Whereas, so it's been a trade-off. It's been harder for us to maybe nudge them to change and get some things done that we would like, but it is absolutely a core to a change in our risk management philosophy to kind of not be overly geographic or supplier dependent. So there's been I think a scene that we have seen there, and that's helped us when we've seen, these climate situations that have popped up where you may get, a short crop in the U.S. and a short crop in Brazil. Super uncommon, but it's happened back to back in a couple years in the last 10 years, and that's accelerated. Now we can debate whether it's transitory inflation or regular inflation, but it's inflation. So I think we have taken those steps to try to rethink about our risk management in our supply chain with a little bit more resilience in mind, to have more optionality and secure longer-term sources for changes that do come from climate.
I know weather does affect retailers, like clothing retailers. Few people don't shop when there's bad weather, so it does affect the sales. I wonder if it has the same effect on restaurants. Have you looked at that?
I only know it from a heat standpoint. We eat a little, if you're hot, you don't eat as much. Having lived on the equator a few years, you can see that a lot, but I don't have any unique yum.
They're global warming. It's Max, did you want to add anything to that conversation?
Well, I think the example that John provides, or that of not having your chicken supply, even though it's not a climate-related risk or a challenge that occurred, those are the exact type of things that are going to be occurring regularly in the future due to climate change. And the fact that y'all leaned into determining all right, this is a realistic scenario. How do we plan for this? How do we adjust accordingly? Those are the types of pieces that we're all going to be facing going forward. And it just provides the opportunity now to be able to learn and get better so that we can face when those consistent crop failures are coming. If you can't get tomatoes to come into a Taco Bell, what do we do then?
Right.
So it's an unfortunate challenge, but a great opportunity to be able to prepare for the future.
Yep. So, the majority of respondents in the survey have carbon reduction goals. And you can't talk about carbon reduction goals in the food and ag space without talking about Scope 3. So, and And I'll start with you, John. You've done a lot in the regen ag space, which I'm assuming is where a big part of your footprint is. Can you talk a little bit about the different programs that the company's put in place?
Happy to talk about our programs and then give a plug for our sustainability report. We try to use it as educational too. Page 36 has a life cycle assessment. We put the life cycle assessment in there of all of beef and chicken, which covers our dairy, beef, and chicken categories, because I think in answering that question, it's a super critical driver, because I think, again, you look at the world's footprint, you look at the growth we're trying to achieve, you can double or triple the total life cycle analysis footprint of chicken or beef with deforestation. So I think you can't underestimate that primary role of minimizing land conversion and eliminating it in high carbon stock areas. So that is kind of a fundamental piece, something we kind of take for granted in a North American context. Mm-hmm. So our programs on what we're doing are, yes, anchored in that legacy work of land conversion and deforestation prevention. Our new programs, we have kind of products. We have a goal to try to have, again, on that three-pronged strategy I mentioned, kind of supplier engagement programs we have kind of 4 or 5 major global dairy providers. We've had really interesting results. They kind of, again, I grew up on a farm, so I look at the front end of the animal and the back end of the animal. Like, what are we doing in feed systems and efficiencies and methane inhibitors, and what are we doing on waste mitigation and that sort of thing, and kind of reductions in that side. So most of the programs we have on dairy are really focused, kind of interestingly, we're testing a new one on a methane inhibitor. It's early, we don't have results yet from that one.
It's a feed?
It's a feed additive. The other one that's been really interesting is kind of old school, but I love it because it's just feed efficiency. And it used kind of micro level measurement and testing across a large dairy provider, covered 60% of the volume for U.S. Pizza Hut by a cow-adjusted basis on cheese, but covered all of that with really looking at how do you really make sure that in the bunk where the animal is, there's nothing left. They get what they need, not more, not less, and that alone reduced 10% of our emissions from methane and overall GHG emissions from that project. So I think there's some nice learnings that we've got from that one. And then we have another one kicked off with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, more on kind of grazing and habitat. It'll be interesting to see how the quantifiable climate benefits are, but it's got nice biodiversity, water restoration, those kind of things in the Intermountain West and kind of grazing areas. So those are kind of the examples on the kind of chicken or beef and dairy side.
Yep. Okay, great. One of the other things I wanted to bring up, and I think Tansi had it on one of her slides, which is boards that had knowledge about water issues, was like 2. And water, we know, is a critical issue, and it's really critical for the beverage business. So I wanted you guys to talk a little bit about just the water risks in general, the types of water risks you face, how you're getting your hands around the risks, and how you're thinking about the management and the water stewardship strategy around it.
I mean, we are a beverage company, so the 2 biggest risks that we have is water is a critical resource in order to grow everything that we need to put in our beverages, and then also within beer and our spirit side, like, we have to have water. And if we say, like, well, we're going to trim down water in our beer and spirits, that means the alcohol content is probably going to go up as a result, because it's a critical.
That's one or the other.
Yeah, think about it in that way. So some advice that I can give everybody on how to go in and identify what your actual water risks are. It's like doing a climate scenario risk assessment that we talked about that we're working with SWCA on. But there's also some really great tools that are out there, like the WRI, like the Water Risk Atlas, that gives you a wide array of modeling that you can do to understand what your risks are, within your 4 walls again and your supply chain. And then once you've kind of honed in and identified those hot spots, like I mentioned before, it's then taking the ROSI framework and then working through a do-nothing scenario versus, here's 10 other things that we could potentially do. So it's in that step, right? It's gathering that information, really vetting everything through to understand what the best option really is.
And what I find fascinating about the water space is when you're talking about watershed restorations, there's a lot of factors that impact the watershed. Who else is drawing from the watershed? What activities are they putting in place? How are they going to affect the evolution of the water quality in the region? So it gets very complicated very fast. And you find using the ROSI framework gives you the kind of a format to help you sort out the assumptions you need to make.
Yeah, absolutely.
And John, we had a conversation earlier when we were talking about water quality and the benefits of, when you talked about RSPO took off, right? And it took off because not just because of the traceability, but the transparency that the what was the organization? The Global
Forest Watch.
Global Forest Watch, right? So the bad actors couldn't hide, and you've got the same issue in water, right? So is there anything being done? And maybe Max, you've seen some tools being developed around that transparency on really where does the pollution come from? I said every farmer will say, well, it's not my farm. It comes from the guy down the road.
I'm a big fan of transparency over traceability. I think traceability can, again, create, as a corporation, you can get a narrow, traceable supply chain, but you may have, in the palm oil case, the jungle's burning on either side.
Right.
That's not what we want. And it's the same way in water. So I think there's some really cool tools that have been innovated that kind of use geospatial technology and monitoring with GPS locations on the ground, and then kind of rolling up kind of in the commodity world, you call it basis. Where's the economically efficient decision to move a commodity from point A to point B that creates a supply shed? So then you can roll those things together and have a pretty good picture of if there's a hot spot here, it's probably going to that primary processor there and ultimately to that retailer there. That's what's been transformative for palm. I always have a lot of crazy ideas and try to pitch them to a million people, but water is one of them. I think we need to find a way to move away from this concept of non-point source pollution, which is kind of a fancy term for agricultural land runoff.
Right.
And get into, okay, where is that hot spot? And it's one that I think collectively we've got to figure out a better way to work on, because it is deeply motivating. And where I've had the most traction with these conversations is actually, oddly enough, with the mayors of the rivers, or the mayors on the Mississippi River system, because they can see an economic impact immediately of nitrogen and phosphates spiking after a big rain.
Right.
So I think we haven't conquered yet, but there's something there in learning of how to put these chess pieces together in a way that explodes transparency, because you will get better behaviors.
Right. And it's going to take a village, right? Not one person's not going to change the water situation. It really takes everybody's efforts. So one of the other findings in the study was that we found a statistically significant association between companies that engage in pre-competitive collaboration and collaboration with third parties, and higher revenue growth of over 5%. So we talked a little bit about that, but can you guys talk about partnerships and how they can add value?
Elyse, I can start. Our company comes out with our impact report. The latest version came out in October, and it talks about all of the partnerships that we have with NGOs and the areas that we're focusing on in social and environmental. And I'm going to put my plug in here too. I would really request that everybody have a read at that, because it really does highlight the wonderful things that we're doing. Because I could go on. We do a lot of things, so I could take up probably the rest of the time.
But you guys were doing a lot with... Oh, okay. You guys are doing a lot with universities to kind of help you better measure some of the impacts, the weather impacts. You partnering with universities, or Alex, I think you mentioned it, and looking at financial markets, looking for ways to put a value.
Yes, so we kind of created almost like a think tank internal to Constellation, where we're coming up with interesting idea, and then we're trying to find the resources to help us to understand, and some of them will potentially end up being capstone projects for business school students, and we collaborate with faculty. But we were thinking about stuff like, okay, all the sustainability that everyone doing with pledges and net zero, how are all of them reflected in financial markets? If you look at future for oil, if everyone says they're going to be all fossil fuels, and there won't be any demand for oil, and if I look at the 2040 price of oil, And if it's anything, I don't know, above $40 should be selling short all day long. But this is a question that we're trying to understand, like how agricultural commodity future prices take into account sustainability, and more importantly, how can we bifurcate that from just all the other factors that impact prices?
Right.
Like
So it's causation, right? You can, and it's valuable in terms of understanding the value your strategies deliver. I have, we talked about the importance of embedding sustainability in your organization. So what is one thing your company's done in the last 2 years to, better embed sustainability across the organization?
I want to say, humbly speaking, we're still on the journey, But I think one thing I always find fascinating is, I report to the board every quarter. We talk a lot about that word governance, only at the up level. The most important governance is our steering committees across the brands, our councils that help drive the regional efforts. We spend a lot of time and have more things to do, but I think one of the efforts that is kind of unsung and not talked about, and hard to get third-party examples of best models that are out there, is how do you pull that governance down into how to deepen the procurement teams into our development and operations teams. Like, I think that's, when I think of embedding sustainability, we spend a lot of time thinking about, we don't really want a big sustainability team. We want it to be a part of the development team's job. We want it to be a part of the procurement team's job. So how do we put governing bodies that keep that on their agenda to make it be integrated?
Right, thanks. And I know, Brandy, I'm going to, since we're running out of time, we want to open for questions. The fact that they brought you into the organization goes a long way to embedding sustainability. So we got 5 minutes, so we'll take some questions from the audience.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for that really insightful conversation. My name is Amli. I'm an undergrad here at NYU. I'm an incoming Deloitte consulting intern, so maybe I'll see you around.
Congratulations.
Sorry?
Congratulations on that. I'm excited to have you.
Thank you. And big Corona fan, but I'm 21, so don't worry. I really like the question about the tools to measure environmental outcomes, and especially as it pertains to monoculture, like in the agricultural industry. Has there been a way, or is there a way that we can quantify the effect of integrating biodiversity into agriculture instead of speaking about the value now about the physical capital and natural capital of monoculture?
Who wants to take that one?
Kind of. So I think there's an interesting conversation occurring in the move from, a few years ago it was climate. I think we've realized it is really hard to really get good data on circular carbon in a food systems context. It's not the same as coal, oil, and gas. So I think there's a movement towards nature and biodiversity that I don't know where that conversation will land, but I can tell you we feel a lot more of those pressures to get better at measuring, finding a system, finding ways to lean in on kind of nature and biodiversity. And the kind of is, there are a few things out there. Again, if you go back to palm, before you do what they call a new planting in palm, you do a high carbon stock study, which is your above ground carbon for trees, but you do also a high conservation value study that is a third-party standard that also looks at the biodiversity side. So we have examples of how it works, but they're not universally applied.
I think some of the other places that we're seeing is when we can be able to couple carbon benefits along with biodiversity benefits and have them ride together. So if we think about just agricultural lands in particular, how we can take what is marginal lands and be able to turn it into buffer strips or do other edge of field practices, because it's not actually making money, you're losing money on those acres. And so how you can be able to do that to create pollinator habitats, they help with water infiltration and other aspects like that. So there's a really great opportunity to be able to have these pieces come together, because it also has a huge carbon impact as well.
And Max has a workshop this afternoon on agriculture and carbon tools. So
Thank
for
you.
those,
Yeah, if anyone wants to dive deep into Scope 3 on ag, we'll have some fun on that.
All right, I'm definitely going to join. Hi, my name is Janet Viader, and I actually am from Napa Valley originally. My family has a winery, so this is all very relevant for me. And I'm going to maybe ping you, Max, on tractor fuel later. But we talked a bit about the environmental aspects like water. And recently, I've heard of different innovations like agrovoltaics. And this is the idea of putting solar panels in grazing or vineyard settings. But so I'd like to hear if you have an opinion on that, but also wanted to turn a bit to the S and see what kind of challenges you've seen in labor, especially with the kind of immigration policies that we've had in the United States lately.
that's for you guys on the grape growing side.
I can talk a
I
little
will say
bit.
though, one thing is they have electric tractors. They've gone electric, so.
So I think on a solar, we not long ago installed solar panels on your favorite winery and Prisoner. And I think it's very beneficial outside of just very obvious benefits of sustainable energy. It's also serves as a hedge against utility prices. And in addition to that, it also creates a power backup in case of power outages. And we all know that California power grid is not the most reliable. And so solar panels, yeah, it's very widely installed in Napa Valley and many vineyards.
Well, I think we're out of time here, and I want to thank my panelists here for a terrific discussion. And I want to recommend everybody, the research paper is out. It's on Deloitte's website. It's on CSB's website, so I encourage everybody to read it.